Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. War is a time of learning lessons, and a lot is being learned. Especially a lot is being learned in India. I've spoken to multiple people about the lessons that India must learn from the Ukraine war. There's also another dynamic of this. What lessons are the Chinese going to learn? To discuss this little bit of an interesting paradigm and with the Chinese flexing muscles, I have with me Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma, who's the Executive Council member at the Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. Of course, retired as a Lieutenant General in the Indian Army, a writer, a speaker, and of course, a strategic contemplator, if I may say that, sir. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Aadi, for inviting.
So it's for me, the Chinese looking at the war in Ukraine with their own tussle with Taiwan and of course India brings in a lot of questions to somebody who's observing this war sitting far, far away from Eastern Europe. One of the things and the criticisms which is coming across towards the Russians is probably over dependence on mechanization and not putting as much as boots on the ground as it is required. Now we know the Chinese are highly mechanized and they've been trying to do this for a long time. How do you view this aspect of the Chinese military and with their tussles, let's say, with India and Taiwan, sir?
Okay, thank you, Adi. It's a very interesting question. In fact, this is a very interesting war and there are lessons for everybody. And we got to learn from them also. And, there is so much of learning experience that one is gathering every day. Now, first, let me put it this way, that if you take a lesson from the Ukraine war, it gives an impression that there was a hesitancy on part of the armed forces to apply the total combat power by the Russians. Now, why did they not apply the complete combat power in the manner of tanks, in the air force, the electronic warfare system, the cyber warfare? In each one of them, Russians are masters. In the firepower, artillery. Artillery has been, the firepower has been their strongest of strengths over a period of time. Why didn't they apply themselves? No, I take a learning experience here that probably if you take the statements given by President Putin over the period of last 8-9 months, including the article that he wrote last year, he said Ukraine is Russia, Russia is Ukraine. There was kind of an impression being carried that he wants a war, but he doesn't want to hurt the Ukrainians and the infrastructure and the people of Ukraine. So my good analysis is that he tied the hands of the military down in while applying the combat power. Please be discriminate, use discriminate force. Don't do what you did in Grozny. Don't do what you did in Raqqa or Aleppo. Not what the Americans did in Fallujah. That kind of firepower must not be used. And I'm just loud guessing it. Time will tell whether this is true or not. So there are restrictions applied. That is why the kind of firepower used against, say, the suburbs of Kyiv or the suburbs of Sumy or Kharkiv wasn't that forceful. He didn't annihilate those cities. Of course, what is done to Mariupol is a different issue which we can talk separately. So there is a civil military dynamic that comes out of this first issue, which I want to state. And when we talk, you and me talk about wars that we have fought in India, and each one of our wars that we fought, the political hierarchy did lay down restrictions. 62, you can't use air force. In 99, you cannot cross the line of control. In 71 war, there were no plans to capture Dhaka. So there are political restrictions laid down at the time of the war that you can't do A, B, C, or D. You draw that thing across into this war. The American military was not able to fight the way they are being trained and practiced and exercised to fight. And that may have been a very severe restriction. So where they had to apply the maximum firepower, they brought themselves, Kherson they had to occupy. Kherson was the most important place because of the water supply system, and they had to capture the bridge on the Dnieper to go across the Dnieper on the other side towards Odisha, to threaten Odisha. Not going towards Odisha, but threatening it. So they applied the firepower and they captured the first 24 hours itself. They had done major success from the Crimea side. and all the sides it was. So I wanted to read into what did they do in first 7 days, what did they do in first 30 days, and the next 30 days, and the next 30 days. Now you split it out, you find that there may be some meaning in the madness that the Western media and everybody else is bringing about in the case of Ukraine war. I take it back home. What did the Americans do in 2003? On first 24 hours, they fired 330 missiles of all types against Iraq. They actually destroyed anything they thought was a viable military objective, maybe in form of infrastructure or maybe in another form. What did the Russians do here? Russians did a little half-hearted cyber attacks across in Ukraine, but they applied about 120 odd missiles in first 24 hours, and they did hit large number of military targets in Ukraine. Now, what happens to the issue of what the Chinese would do? Now, the Chinese have been sitting on our borders in against Taiwan or against us for a very long time. They have been threatening us. Chinese have global ambitions. Chinese have a vision of themselves reaching a place in 2049 with interim guidelines of 2027, 2035, and the people. So Chinese have a plan to it. They are not knee-jerk. They are planning as to how they want to do things. And to do that, to reach a global status, how would they like to apply combat power? To reach a global status, they have to make sure that their periphery is not threatened. Their periphery is sorted out. You can't become a global power to say you have inimical neighbors who can trouble you in the borders. Herein comes India. They probably wanted to settle the border of India. We knew that all this number of joint working group meetings and all the agreements and all that SR meetings taking place, etc., etc. There was no progress on line of actual control. And the Chinese started calling it self-sovereignty issue beyond territorial integrity. We will, if you follow the statements of President Xi Jinping, he said not an inch of territory will be lost, which is given to our forefathers. So all that thought process, and this he's stating openly from 2012 onwards. This is 10 years now. How would they fight a war is one of the most important issues that comes across your mind. Now, you raised the question of mechanization. There are obviously some faults across in the quality of the tanks produced in the Soviet bloc, and we must learn from it. One is the issue of cook-off itself, which means that own ammunition is placed in a manner that when you fire an overhead missile, a javelin or an NLAW, your own ammunition inside the tank cooks off and destroys the tank. It's not that missile. And, this missile NLAW actually doesn't hit the tank. It bursts about a meter above the tank. And that above the tank, it's able to cook off the ammunition inside the tank. The American tanks have got some kind of a better protection for their ammunition. So there is a learning experience here as far as armor is concerned. The third point I wish to make. Can the armor or mechanized warfare, there is the potency of tank, you and me must not deny. It's got a 125 mm smooth bore gun, it fires missiles, it's got anti-aircraft gun, it's got machine guns. You got 45 machine guns in an armored regiment here and 45 main guns. It's a very potent force. And there is no comparable platform to tank. Let's not write a tank off. But is mechanized warfare suitable for urban terrain? That's the question I wish to ask myself. If you want to use it, a tank, he used tanks across in Kherson. It was 80 odd kilometers from Crimea. They went across en masse and they reached and they succeeded and they captured Kherson. They nearly captured the power plant in Zaporozhye. So they've done a good amount of work. They reached Mariupol within 1 week. They had joined up with the forces of Donbass in Mariupol, outside the Mariupol. So I think on the southwest, they did a fantastic job. But, you see, Kyiv is the size of Bangalore. and the suburbs are huge suburbs. All these suburbs. Now you're bashing your heads against an urban area, which is called irregular warfare. So this is a mechanized, conventional warfare wanting to take on irregular warfare of the adversary, who's got uh, irregular kind of weaponry, which is all these missiles which can be fired indoors. Our rocket launcher has to be fired outside because there's a backblast. These things have got twin motors and in tandem warheads and even fuses in the rear. So, these are modern weapon systems created only to destroy Russian type of tanks and
Mm.
Russian types of mechanized weapons. And the Ukrainians were taught from 2014 onwards as to how to combat the massive onslaught of Russian mechanized forces. So they trained for this. They planned for it. This is where the bane of mechanization. A mechanized warfare in deserts, I think it will be able to go through like water. But in urban terrain where the adversary is fighting irregular warfare, I think the mechanized forces have to relearn or rethink or redefine warfare per se. I'm again not saying tank has been written off, but I
Absolutely.
think the terrain dictates it. And I can go back and discuss China in relationship to terrain, and we move forward.
Sure. It's, by the, you've brought out a couple of very important points which tells China there's a story to be told, because you really can't be over dependent on one sort or one part of warfare to kind of win a battle. It has to be a combined arms effort. So talking about network centric warfare, and that's something which is, the supposed to be the warfare of tomorrow. We didn't see much of it in Ukraine. There is obviously a element of electronic warfare which is going to be there on the battlefield, but the impact that thought that this sort of a warfare would bring about a crippling impact. We don't see it happening towards Russia with the Western help to Ukraine, or the other way around as well. So, how do you portray network centric warfare, which China keeps at a very, very premium in terms of its warfighting capabilities?
So let's disaggregate what you're asking. There is a network centric warfare that exemplifies a use of information and information technologies to improve your combat power, which is seamless connection between the shooter and and the firer. And so network centric warfare started in the 90s. It's not a new item. It's been there for quite some time, and it has been effectively brought across seamless communication at all levels, where you have the head up displays, you have the information about your friendly forces, what are the foes. So the West has kind of practiced it and brought it to some kind of a very high level. Network centric warfare at that level. Our Navy has done fantastic work. Indian Navy has done very good work. Indian Air Force has done very fine work. We have done very good work in voice communication. Maybe in data, we need to work harder. So that's the network centric part of it. We come to the second part of the issue about information warfare. Will the did the Russians keep quiet? Russians, they are masters. When you see the today's writings on their potency on cyber, in some of the writings, they are third or the fourth power in the world on
Yeah.
cyber potency. In some of the writings, they are the second tier power. First tier being only United States, they are second tier power. But they have succeeded in Estonia in 2007. They did a fantastic job in Georgia in 2008. They did a very fantastic job in 2014 in cyber warfare against Ukraine. And then subsequently 16, 17, they actually switched off their Ukraine's power stations, etc. So it is that it's not that they are not, and they have been sorting their banking system out. So the Russians have been working on cyber warfare as an offensive warfare tool for quite some time and succeeded. Even against the United States, in the Democratic Convention, they were able to make a Democratic Committee meetings. They would make an effect there. The President Trump said later on, or subsequently, Hillary also felt that there was a mass amount of the Russian interference into their elections by using electronic means like cyber, etc., etc. And then there was solar winds attack. There was an attack being carried out a year and a half ago. Why didn't all this uh, Russians do so now? I take it from the statement given by Admiral Nakasone. He is the head of the cyber in the United States, and he gave a statement in the written statement to the Armed Forces Committee. He said that we have been training these people, Ukrainians, for defensive and offensive for a very long time. This is last month in April. He's providing a statement to the committee, and also he says that we have been able to now get involved as we knew the war was coming. We got involved totally into this game of protecting Ukrainians in a large manner. So on 26th itself, the Ukrainians came out very big way into protecting against cyber warfare in that manner because the Americans were helping, the West was helping them. Also, they created a kind of forge of about a lakh or eventually I think 4 lakh people who joined in worldwide who were able to target Russian things. So I would say Russians did utilize. There was an attack on the space satellite, one of the spy satellites by the Russians, which actually switched off some communication in Ukraine the first 2 days of war. So it's not that they didn't use it, but it seemed that they were again half-hearted. They could have done much better, but they have the capacity to do so. Why were they half-hearted? People said people are giving whole lot of conjectures who are analysts, why this is happening and why that is happening. But the fact of the matter is that there would be some rationale, I think. Yeah. So, Adi, what I'm saying is that the Russians did try, but it didn't try the full weight of cyber warfare against the Ukrainians. And you can give any rationale, and time will tell as to why didn't they do so. It must be a part of discrimination in warfare that they wanted to apply. But today, you can't put a finger to it as to why this great force of modern warfare was not applied to the fullest extent by the Russians in this warfare.
So that's a lesson for China. It has to be full on ongoing if it's if push comes to shove. So that's what you would put it as.
Yeah, so I would say that any nation who fights a war with an adversary first studies the adversary's strengths and weaknesses, and Chinese will also study their our strengths and our weaknesses, where we have shortfalls and where their strengths, and let's not begrudge any adversary saying he is less experienced or is less prone to warfare. Adversary plans to fight a war like the war should be fought. He said that our strength is on the borders. We have the capacity to fight it. We have the defenses. We have the offense plans. We will fight tooth and nail on the borders, and we will be able to achieve great success on the territorial wars. The Chinese ought to know that this is not their strength. Fighting at that altitude is our strength. We have fought over 75 years. We are in those altitudes that we are fighting. We do exercises of the kind, and Chinese also do it. I mean, we follow Chinese exercises also. But on the border territorial wars, we have the strength to combat. So what would he do? Whether he'll apply, firstly, will he apply the same kind of missile warfare and the cyber warfare ab initio before he comes down to contacting on the border? Certainly he'll do it. Certainly he will address us in a manner which, if the war comes up in a day, or whenever it comes up, he will apply cyber in a manner that it will cause great amount of disruptions among the military forces and maybe hinterland. Also, he will apply his great powers on the rocketry force that he's got, the newly what he constituted a rocket force, and there would be substantial number of missiles of all kinds, ballistic cruise, air launch, ground launch, you name it, against specific targets that he would have pre-worked it out. So that must be expected. But we should have the capacity to accept the pain, rejuvenate ourselves, and respond in equal and better measure. So that's warfare.
Absolutely. So that is absolutely true. So you spoke about terrain, and I'd like I'd like to go across to that. A lot of the a lot of people who comment online about India and China especially comment about force levels and the number of tanks and the number of this and the number of that. It's the same story with the Russians and the Ukrainians, but we also saw that the Russians were not able to span out because of the Rasputinnika, which is the the mushing up of all the land in that entire area. When you look at China, it also faces a similar obstacle, which is the Himalayas. Uh, how do you now put all these things across into a paradigm with regards terrain itself and the battle fighting between India and China?
So while we talk loosely about Tibet being a plateau, large plateaus, and there are large areas where the tank maneuver can be done as if it's in desert, I think all this is grossly exaggerated. There are flat areas, but to come to an Indian side, he has to come through narrow gullies. There are no flat, vast lands where the mechanized forces will come up the way they come. They have to come through narrow gullies before they come to our own areas. They may have in their hinterland plains. Maybe in some time when you come into depth of India, you can find some kind of better valleys. But finally, he has to traverse through select gullies all across the borders. These gullies are what you and me will call passes of various kinds. Ladakh, the word La means pass only. They're only passes he has to cross. So when the pass is, or a gully is, say, 3 kilometers wide, and the others, both sides are huge mountain ranges which are not traversed by mechanized forces, well, he is stuck to those gullies to come through. It's not that he's got 5,000 tanks or whatever number of 14,000 tanks he's got. He has to come through narrow gullies, yeah? And the narrow gullies are easily defendable by firepower, by air attacks, by you name it, by irregular warfare.
Hmm.
Same irregular warfare that has been done into plains in urban warfare, we can do the same irregular warfare to deny him. And actually, it's tank after a tank. Yeah, you just cannot. It's a single file you have to come to, or maybe 2 lines of tanks. You just have to make sure. And then, of course, in these gullies are rivers. Each one of these gullies. Say, you and me know the word Galwan. Galwan is one of the access routes. It's 2 kilometers wide. Both sides are tall mountain ranges. He can't use mechanized forces there. Just 2 kilometers to be denied is not difficult at all. So while there may be areas where mechanized forces can be used, but their use is limited. This warfare, if has to be carried out, has to be actually multi-dimensional. In electronic warfare systems, in cyber warfare, in third dimension, maybe by helicopter lifting up people and dropping at in the rear, or in the form of infantry attacks, or it has to be hybrid. It's not, and let's be clear, it's not a mechanized warfare terrain in super high altitude that permeates across the Himalayas. Now, having said that, there are corridors where he can be used, and these corridors are easily deniable. That's the fact of the matter.
Sir, one of the biggest, issues that the Russians supposedly or allegedly saw in the beginning of the operation, and we had certain videos coming out of this, was that the Russian tanks out of fuel. Basic logistics. I don't know if the Russians had actually planned for that long a war and this and that. That's a whole different debate altogether. But the question of logistics, and the Chinese don't have much of a, from a preliminary analysis that I can do, which is on open source, they don't have much of a logistical setup, especially to counter with Eastern Ladakh. Their lines are very, very, very long. And we also saw the Chinese publicizing videos of their troops getting winter equipment from Beijing. So that was quite a telling factor. Whereas I know for a fact our winter clothing will probably go from Chandigarh. How does this logistics play into the game, and what kind of a lesson or what kind of a warning would China get looking at what Russia went through?
So I first go back to Ukraine. What the Russians do, or Russians did. Now Russians in South had no logistic problem whatsoever.
Yeah.
In South, and they moved across from Crimea and came towards Kherson and to Zaporizhia, or coming across to Mariupol. They had no logistic issues because they were able to manage. The distances were not so vast. When you start from Belarus and you come across through 3 axes, each axis having 2 to 3. So they work on what we call it CAA, Combined Armed Armies. Combined Armed Army is in Russian terms something akin to a corps, but they don't have divisional headquarters. So 2 to 3 corps across east and west of Belarus, and the combined armed armies, they came in over 100 odd kilometers. That becomes a little viable. And how does Russian logistics work? Russian logistics works on a push model, meaning that every day they work out what is the quantum of force that has gone ahead and what is the template which lays down this is what is to be supplied to them. So amount of fuel or number of vehicles, amount of ration, amount of ammunition. So there is a push model for it. The Western armies work on a pull model where what is actually required by troops on ground is fed across on electronic channels to the network centric centricity, as you mentioned earlier. And it is only that item is supplied. So there is supply and demand is a different method of functioning as far as West is concerned and as far as these people are concerned. Now, coming back to China, the Chinese over a long period of time has created an infrastructure, or so we presume, that they've created infrastructure in proximity to the borders where there is, which could be deemed as kind of places where logistics echelons could be based and some stacking or stocking can be carried out or could be carried out. So we deem it that the Russians have planned a series of these issues across there. Sorry, Chinese. The Russians work on railways. So Russians work on railways largely. They have created railway stations all across in the proximity of Ukraine for where supplies are moved forward. But in the case of Chinese, the railways are still far away. So they have hopefully created some kind of infrastructure where they will stock it and they will bring logistics forward. So there is a difference here. One difference that comes out is it's how much of depth of operations you carry out. If you plan to do 100 kilometers that you did in Kiev, then be rest assured that the irregular forces who have been tasked to target only fuel bowsers will be behind your back in targeting fuel bowsers. And they'll make sure that as you mentioned, these swampy conditions across there, early melting of snows in Ukraine cause a whole lot of problems of being sticking across on the road axes. So if you are the axes are stopped and blocked by means of carrying out these kind of attacks, there will be problem here. So as much if you plan, even the Americans had problems of logistics when they went across from Kuwait across to Baghdad. See, we may forget about it. They started on 20th of March and it took them 40 days to reach Baghdad. 40 days. But there's nothing gung-ho about it. Logistics dictates operations. Be rest clear, especially operations of the mechanized kind, which guzzle fuel. So, in the Chinese, they would have logistic echelons created closer to the borders, but it also depends on what is the plan of operations because borders are tough area. Where we are deployed are very tough areas, and they would have problems of maintaining their logistic echelons. As we would have in case we decide to go, whenever we decide to go for offensive, we have also to manage our logistics similarly.
Absolutely, and yeah. I mean, if I may, with my little knowledge, as a little bit of an addition to what you said, a cross-strait operation that they are planning to Taiwan is going to be even more perilous, looking at the factor that the lines of communications are almost 80, 90, 100 kilometers in certain areas overseas.
So Taiwan is a different kettle of fish. Yeah. If he wants to occupy 2-3 of these proximity islands, so there's a Kinmen Island, which is about 5 kilometers from Chinese mainland, it's a different story. He wants to go to Penghu Island, which is about halfway down to Taiwan, that's a different story. But when he wants to go to Taiwan, well, firstly, the period is fixed up because the seas are so choppy, you can't even do amphibious landing throughout the year. So everybody understands he can only come in this month and that month, and he can't come throughout the year. And of course, the issue is that it is sea bound. You ought to have carried out either the aerial landing or the sea landing. But the advantage the Ukrainians had is that the Polish borders were all open, and the West was supplying across to them, which Taiwan may not be able to be supplied at the times of war. That's a difference there.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's a debate, I think, which is ongoing within the strategic circles of the Indo-Pacific as well.
Yeah, okay.
Sir, I'd like to actually move across to information warfare. You hinted about it in the first answer, but my question is a little apart from what we are trying to say. And you also mentioned that the Russians are masters in information warfare. The Americans actually, blame them for, as you also mentioned, fiddling around with their presidential election. With a reputation like that, one really expected the Russians should be able to create a favorable narrative for themselves, at least online, um, you know, with regards to the operations. Now we realize that all these media companies are owned by the West, and Chinese would have the same dilemma. How do you look at
Yeah.
this?
So I agree with you that the expectations on information warfare and narrative building was as high as we would have expected the mechanized forces to do so, or the air power, the Russian air power to do so. Information warfare is also one of these baskets where the expectations were singularly high, but it was not a success story as far as Russians concerned. One is that the West jammed Russian media totally. So the RT, which was the most significant channel, and all the other that the Russians had were jammed in a larger manner. So the RT itself was failed, and all the other, and the West had a worked to a plan. The Americans had worked to a plan on information warfare. So you name a media across the world started broadcasting inimical news about the Russians. It was a glut. So you did not know what is truth, what is blatant lie, what is half truth. Everything got subsumed together. Who was saying the truth was lost in this den that was created by the Western media. And many of these sites that you follow, ISW, all are very good sites. But you read the language and all, it is one-sided. These are not balanced information. So both side information was not flowing through, and I think the Russians did not do a fair job of doing so. So and they did not plan the narrative warfare and the information warfare, which is now the most important part of warfare. Even before, one hears that in West, when you make operational plans, the information people actually also lay down parameters as to how the plan has to be executed. Why would Russians do a stupid, I would not say stupid, but get involved into crimes, war crimes, Bucha. I mean, it should have been planned in a more dignified, and if you are withdrawing back to those areas, it should have been planned across in a dignified manner, knowing very well that the West is already talking about war crimes. And the war crimes, they are already, in last 20 years, there are many people have gone across on war crimes. Today, they are saying the war crime investigators are already there investigating people. And, and a soldier of Russians have been charged for war crimes in Ukraine already. So, this means that the total plan on information warfare has failed. It may not schematically done. So I would say that Chinese are masters there. Firstly, you can't make out what exactly and how they want to plan it. Chinese in the game of BRI and their influence building across the world have actually over 100 odd ports worldwide are being built by them. And they have got ingress across to and they invested in many of these Western media agencies.
Yeah.
Could be any country, which they literally own, and which make noises which are favorable to Chinese.
Yeah.
This is a well planned move. It's not that it's been done. So they would be, if something goes wrong, they would be people in the Western media who will be generating information that maybe, if we have a war with them, inimical to us. I mean, there will be adverse publicity against us coming from the West, because there will be media which has been owned by the Chinese in form A, B, or C. We have to plan a narrative properly. And I think we need to work hard on this one. Personally, between you and me, I think on matters of information warfare and narrative building, we have to get professional. We need to establish ourselves in peacetime. And peacetime it continues similarly, and in wartime similarly. And because the worldwide narrative has actually pushed Russia into a corner where larger number of nations have taken dislike to this war in Ukraine, more because of what the media has projected Russians to be, especially in matters of war crimes. We need to plan properly.
Absolutely. Absolutely, sir. I personally believe you. I mean, the attacks of Balakot was won by us, but the narrative, to a large extent, teetered towards the Pakistanis, where even half the world today would question the virality of those strikes when, it's known what really happened. And that's
And
just
also, yeah, and also you're right, not Balakot alone. It's a swift retort which the Pakistanis did 2 days later.
yes,
Where they sold a narrative to the West, and the West started broadcasting Pakistani narrative. Yeah.
absolutely, sir. And that was interesting to actually see that, how easily the entire game changes when we talk about what exactly is happening in the. You mentioned Buka. One of the lot of people are now saying that this was staged and this and that.
Yep.
I'm sure the truth will sometime come out, but the first round of firing Ukraine won. There is no question about it. I think that is unparalleled. So, with regards to manpower, I think, that's the question, and that's where the confidence in India as a country comes in towards its army. The quality of the armed forces personnel, their training, their motivation, and their regimentation, and the whole lot more that goes into making an Indian soldier. Uh, a lot of things are said about the Russian soldiers as well. They've gone through hell and back, but they've still stood by. The Chinese, on the other hand, a lot of analysts question the quality of the Chinese soldier in terms of his ability to kind of make decisions on the ground, be politically correct about those decisions, and of course his actual interest in joining in the armed forces. How do you comment on this, sir?
Okay, all these are intangible questions, and
Absolutely.
you can't actually come back to some kind of grounded answers. In case of Russians, one of the issues was that they had the special military operations. They did not call it a war. You
War.
recollect, they call this. If you call it war, there is full-time mobilization authorized.
Yeah.
And mobilization means the nation gets mobilized, reservists gets called in. So the probably the government of Russia did not want national mobilization, so they call it a special military operation. When you do that, as it is, the units are 70% strength, and then there are about 15 to 20% conscripts. So, and which cannot be used into combat. So the manpower available in units actually degrades down substantially because it was not called a war. It was called a special military operation. So the special military operation had meaning behind it. It is just not being said for the purpose of saying. In our case, you have rightly pointed out, we have tremendous amount of cohesion, tremendous amount of training. We've saw bullets firing. We have been battle inoculated umpteen number of times in life here. So the troops are solid, hardy, and also well versed into warfare of this super altitude. So we have great pluses here. You spoke about the Chinese. Now the fact is that actually, large number of people are now degrading Russians. Okay, their tank crews did not know how to fight. There were no combined arms team contest. The pilots were ill trained. The number of pilots per aircraft was poor. All these things are is that victor and vanquished issues. No adversary must be taken for granted. No adversary must be taken that the adversary is ill prepared for it. He's conscript. He looks on his shoulders. He's got hierarchical issues. They're ill trained. They haven't fought a war from 79. When an adversary comes to fight a war, it must be taken that he's preparing himself to come for that war, and he's trained for it. And therefore, if the soldier that we fight across the Himalayas is not apt at it, that will be our advantage at the time when we go for war. But today, we have to prepare ourselves for combating a professional force across the borders, which is as professional and as well trained as us. May not be as experienced, but we must not, soft pedal the issues of the quality of the soldiers on the other side. We must take it that that soldier will be as well prepared. They have a hierarchical system of command and control, which emanates from CMC, and everything ends and begins as CMC or the Western or the data. But all those things, I think they have better network centricity. They will be able to better have command decision making systems are better. So maybe they will be able to offset many of these issues by the network centricity the Chinese have. When we fight it, we should fight it as a adversary who needs to be taken with respect and fought like a solid adversary. And don't take it lightly, saying that he's inexperienced, etc.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's absolutely a very realistic way of looking at things. If the Chinese soldier indeed is not that strong, that's going to be an advantage to us, and that's just about it. But we prepare the way we are supposed to prepare. Sir, coming towards the end of a very interesting conversation, I'd like to ask you a very, it's a twisted sort of a question, if I may, sir. The sanctions which inevitably would come on an aggressor today, if we look at the Russians, how they've been able to handle the sanctions, and we see their economy going up, their debt to GDP ratios are down, they are not in a bad position as was perceived before the sanctions were hit onto them. Couple of reasons: they're self-sufficient in terms of energy, food, and a lot of other things. China, on the other hand, is not, sir. A lot of people say that the Russians have time. They've had a lot of time and opportunity to prepare for these sanctions. And the Chinese media is now talking about preparations of such kind of sanctions and a bit of a scare with regard them. How do you look at the Chinese outlook to the inevitable sanctions that would come towards it in any sort of military aggression, sir?
So I think the biggest learning experience in this war hasn't been the fight on the ground, the mechanized forces and air force and cyber. I think those are good lessons to be learned. But the biggest lesson that one can draw in is the weaponization of economy. And that is one very significant issue. See, in the worst of time, the Iranians had about 3,300 odd sanctions placed against the Iranians. The maximum sanctioned country has been Iran till date, 3,000 something sanctions. The Russians, in the first month itself, had surpassed 5,500 types of sanctions. So they have become, and now they, I think, going to 6,000 something. 6,000 variety of sanctions placed against Russia. It's the most sanctioned country ever in the history. So the weaponization of economy is the biggest issue. One. Second, if I have foreign exchange reserves, it's like you and me having fixed deposits, and I keep fixed deposit where it benefits me best. So I may keep it in the U.S. banks, or keep it in the Western banks or the European banks. But if in the war tomorrow that money is denied to me for my usage, that's a different type of warfare.
Yeah.
Now, if I would say a bank tells me, okay, I will not give you money when you require it, I'll say, let me shift the bank. Yeah, I'll keep the money in the same currency, maybe US dollars or whatever. I'll keep it somewhere else where I'm guaranteed the money is with me, and it can't be sanctioned and closed away. So that's that blocking of the foreign exchange reserves that belong to Russia by itself, by the West and by the United States, is a second type of warfare, part of the sanction, but it is a serious issue because it denies him use of his own money. The Chinese have substantial foreign exchange reserves outside. In fact, they have substantial purchases carried out in various forms all over the world, which can be converted into money. But there is a difference between China and Russia. China is the second largest economy of the world. China is a manufacturing powerhouse of the world. There is nothing that you can point out which doesn't have a Chinese connection. Now, of course, the cost of labor has gone up in China quite a bit. It's nearly doubled and tripled from the last 20 years. So there are problems coming up, and people are shifting across to Bangladesh and to Southeast Asia. But from a mobile phone to you name it, there is a Chinese linkage in manufacturing or assembling or whatever you say. Can you sanction the second largest economy, a $15 trillion economy, in the same manner that you would sanction a $2 trillion economy?
That's difficult.
There is Russia $2 trillion economy, and this is $15 trillion. There are vast differences, and then Chinese have significant influence. Now, let's say we casually talk about what Chinese have done to the economy of Sri Lanka, which I've been following it for some time. But the fact of the matter is that there are over 100 ports that the Chinese are building and built and running worldwide. including the one of the largest port in the Mediterranean in Greece, which supplies the nearly half of Europe, is made, sorted out by the Chinese and run through them here. And then there are African countries, and they are, so to say that you want to sanction China, you are sanctioning a very large part of the world by itself. There is a issue here, and how far the sanctions will be successful. But having said that, there is intense debate in China on this issue of sanctions and what effect and what type of sanctions can be if tomorrow something goes wrong and they go to Taiwan or they something else across there in that part of the world, in East Asia, what sanctions can be placed and what the West can do. Well, this is an issue of debate in China. As it is China last year, 2021, and the first quarter has been unstable period. That's why they call 2022 a year of stability. Why the Chinese call this year of stability? Because firstly, the President Xi Jinping wants to get re-elected in the 20-party conference this year. But that, having said that, that common prosperity failed. There's been over $1 trillion lost in the technological firms, the Alibaba, the Didi, and the 10 cents, which were brought into governmental control. And then now they have also put political commissar, political secretaries type people into private corporations also. So they're trying to control everything. It's an unstable last year in China. For them to get across to warfare, they have to think very clearly as to what's going to happen in the future. It's not so simple. So I'll answer in this manner that sanctions against Russia is one thing. Sanctions against China is not going to be that simple. But the Chinese are anxious on this score as to what can happen and what kind of, because as you rightly pointed out, they two major things, the agricultural produce and the energy that the Chinese get from outside. These are very significant things that go across from the Indian Ocean and elsewhere to be transported to China. Those can be singularly denied as a sanction, and that must be a thought process into their mind as to how they want to offset it.
Indeed, sir. One of the reasons I think we see a lot of talks between the Russians and the Chinese to fill up their strategic reserves in terms of oil. And that's a clear sight and indication that the Chinese feel these are probably one or two areas where they are not in the best of strengths with regards a blowback from the rest of the world. Sir, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. I think we've analyzed and broken open this entire paradigm of, I don't know what kind of warfare that I would call it, actually, just popped into my head, restricted warfare. We call it unrestricted warfare, but I'll use it as restricted warfare going on in Eastern Europe. You
start off, you'll be author like authors of Grey Zone, Hybrid. You start a terminology, you'll be author tomorrow.
I've been trying to find a term, so because as a matter of fact, I spoke to somebody from Russia who looks after foreign affairs, and he's a professor in Moscow Institute, and he as well brought this point out very clearly that you also brought out, that this is a special military operation. It's not a war. War fighting is completely different, so please don't analyze it like that. Analyze it as per a special case or a special operations. And he was quick enough to point out our special military operation, if I may say that, in Kargil as well. So we have live examples right there. Thank you so much, sir. A lot of lessons that I think India needs to learn, Chinese need to learn, and the world needs to learn from this live example of modern conventional combat and an economic warfare which is happening in Eastern Europe. Till next time, sir, for another subject.
Thank you, Aadi. Pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.